Charles Wagner's voice boomed through the conference room glass as I walked past, clutching my morning coffee like a lifeline. Innovation comes from fresh perspectives, he was saying, chest puffed out like he was delivering a TED Talk to a room full of nodding heads. I didn't stop walking. I'd heard this speech before, actually heard it at my wedding 4 years ago when he toasted his daughter for choosing a good provider and me for keeping the catering budget reasonable. My name is James Parker, I'm 49 years old, and for the past 4 years I've been the guy who actually makes Charles Wagner Manufacturing Solutions run while Charles takes credit for it. And yeah, he's my father-in-law, which in his kingdom means I'm the unpaid consultant with better health insurance. Want the truth? Being the son-in-law didn't help me climb the ladder, it buried me under it. Charles liked keeping me at ground level so he could play the magnanimous king, doling out opportunities to outsiders while keeping his own house humble. He called it character building. I called it a 4-year performance review with no promotion. I built the entire logistics pipeline from scratch. Negotiated vendor exclusivity deals with suppliers who hadn't returned Charles's calls in a decade. Turned a department that ran on Excel spreadsheets and prayer into a lean machine with 22% profit growth year over year. Did anyone notice? Hell, half the office still thought my name was Jack. The only time I saw my name in company communications was when I got copied on the travel policy update because I'd canceled a VP's trip to Vegas when he tried to expense a couple's massage. That same VP, Stephen Richards, once asked me if I was the IT guy. I run 3 departments, Stephen. But sure, I'll restart your computer if it helps you sleep at night. Then there was the big client win last quarter. Hartwell Industries, a 38-page proposal, 8 months of relationship building, and a custom tracking system rollout that I designed myself. The client sent Charles a gift basket addressed to me personally. He kept the whiskey and forwarded me a blurry phone photo of the thank you card with a thumbs-up emoji. Still, I stayed because part of me believed that maybe, just maybe, hard work would eventually outshine bloodlines. That being better at the job would matter more than being born into the right dinner conversations. Stupid, right? But here's the thing about being the backbone of an operation. You learn to document everything. Not just for your own protection, but because you're the guy who actually needs to know where all the bodies are buried. That's how I ended up staring at one particular clause I'd written into our renewal agreement with Apex Manufacturing last year. Buried in Section 7.3, a few lines of legal language I'd negotiated giving me personally exclusive vendor liaison status through Q4 2024. The lawyer had blinked at me when I insisted on that language. "Isn't that unusual?" she'd asked. I just smiled and said, "Sometimes you don't know you're being written out until they need your signature." So there I was, 4 years in, always ready to prove myself, still hoping Charles might say nice work just once. What I got instead was an all-hands meeting with catered bagels and a grinning intern named Brian Cooper. But let me tell you about the golf lunch first, because that's where the fuse got lit. Charles had been extra chipper that week, kept humming off-key and strutting around the office like he'd just discovered fire. My wife mentioned over dinner that her dad had played golf with his old buddy Alan Brooks, and Alan's son Brian had just graduated business school and might be interning with us. Interning? I repeated, cutting my steak like it had personally insulted me. Yeah, just for a few months. Dad says he's sharp. Real potential. Cool. Real potential. At 22 years old with 0 industry experience. A week later, Brian Cooper showed up. Perfect haircut, firm handshake, dress shoes that still had the store polish. Everyone fell over themselves welcoming him. Charles gave him the full tour personally. I'd been there 4 years and still didn't have a reserved parking spot. Brian got the desk next to mine. Dual monitors, ergonomic chair, window view. I was still working on the laptop I'd bought myself 2 years ago. Day 3, he asked me how to access the project management system. "I'll get you set up," I said with my professional smile. "Just a heads up, you'll want to familiarize yourself with the Apex manufacturing protocols, especially the liaison requirements. Trickier than they look." He nodded like he understood. "Apex Manufacturing, got it." I tapped my temple. 4 years of relationship building lives up here. What I didn't say: you'll never crack that nut unless you know exactly which strings I pulled. 2 weeks after Brian's miraculous descent from Country Club Olympus into our open office purgatory, the rumors started flying. Overheard conversations by the coffee machine. An accidentally forwarded email from the CFO's assistant. Something big was coming. Revenue doubling big. A major logistics overhaul for high-volume clients using proprietary systems. The same systems I'd been developing in my spare time for 8 months, between fixing invoices and explaining to people named Brad why a $400 steak dinner wasn't a legitimate business expense. This wasn't just another quarterly adjustment. This was the project, the kind you put at the top of your resume in bold letters, the kind that gets you noticed by headhunters and board members. Naturally, I'd been laying groundwork for months. My team had already beta tested a logistics optimization module that cut delivery times by 23%. We were ready. We were the only department running under budget and ahead of schedule. The module itself was elegant, a real-time tracking system that integrated with our existing ERP software and provided predictive analytics for supply chain bottlenecks. I'd spent countless evenings fine-tuning the algorithms, testing integration points, and documenting every process flow. The technical specifications alone filled a 40-page manual that I'd written during lunch breaks and weekend sessions. But here's what made it special: the vendor relationship layer. See, most logistics software treats suppliers like interchangeable parts. My system recognized that vendors are people with their own schedules, priorities, and quirks. Apex Manufacturing, for instance, always shipped 2 days early if you called on Tuesday mornings and asked about their warehouse manager's new grandkid. Steelworks Industrial would expedite orders if you mentioned their college football team was having a good season. These weren't just vendor relationships. They were strategic partnerships built on 4 years of consistent communication, reliability, and mutual respect. The kind of relationships that don't transfer with a handoff email and a conference call introduction. I'd mapped every one of these connections, documented the key contact preferences, and built automated reminder systems that would prompt our team about important personal details. Birthday notifications for buyers' kids, anniversary reminders for key decision makers, alerts when their local teams made headlines. It was CRM meets emotional intelligence, and it worked like magic. But the real genius was in the contract language. Every vendor agreement I'd negotiated included specific performance clauses tied to relationship maintenance. Not just delivery schedules and quality metrics, but communication protocols, escalation procedures, and continuity requirements. If you didn't know the secret handshakes, you couldn't get the best pricing, the fastest turnarounds, or the priority status when things went sideways. Then one night, as I was reheating leftover Chinese food and wondering if beer counted as a vegetable, my wife walked into the kitchen grinning like she'd solved world hunger. "Dad's excited about that expansion project," she said. "He told me you've built the whole foundation, said he's going to give it to you." I didn't reply immediately, just sipped my beer and smiled like a man who'd heard this bedtime story before. The princess never gets the castle. She gets passed over for the court jester who once juggled 3 balls and called it innovation. "Don't look like that," she said. "He means it this time." "Sure," I said, right after he stops calling my department the engine room. But I couldn't help it. Somewhere in the back of my mind, hope flickered like a birthday candle in a hurricane. What if this time was different? What if all those late nights, all those spreadsheet autopsies, all those times I'd smiled and nodded while Charles explained my own job to me? What if it was finally going to pay off? The next morning I showed up early, cleaned up my quarterly reports, sent Charles some optimized projections with clean charts and executive summaries. The kind of professional presentation that would make any CEO look smart in front of his board. His response, a thumbs up emoji. That afternoon I saw him across the street at Murphy's Deli, sharing a sandwich with Alan Brooks, and Alan's son Brian nodding eagerly while Charles gestured like he was explaining the theory of everything. They didn't see me standing there with my iced coffee, pretending I wasn't calculating exactly how many sick days I had saved up for a strategic mental health week. Brian was taking notes while Charles painted grand visions in the air, my visions no doubt, while Brian nodded like he wasn't still Googling what supply chain optimization meant. Back at the office, Brian had a sticky note on his monitor. "Call Apex. Ask about liaison stuff." I stared at that note for a solid 30 seconds, then went to the bathroom to practice my resignation speech in the mirror. Still, nobody had made anything official, so I kept pushing forward. Scheduled team meetings, drafted implementation timelines, even created a presentation titled Project Elevate Phase 1 Roadmap. I saved a backup copy in a folder labeled When Hell Freezes Over. The presentation was comprehensive. 42 slides covering everything from technical architecture to ROI projections, market analysis, competitive positioning, risk assessment, implementation phases. I'd included detailed vendor integration plans, staff training protocols, and even contingency strategies for the inevitable hiccups that come with any major system rollout. More importantly, I'd documented every assumption the project was built on, which vendors would participate, what pricing agreements were in place, which technical integrations were already tested and ready. The whole thing was a house of cards, and I'd built every single card while keeping detailed notes about exactly how they all fit together. That night, Charles sent a company-wide email. Subject: Exciting Growth Ahead. The body was corporate word salad about synergies and strategic partnerships, but I could read between the lines. Big project coming. Everyone knew I'd built the foundation. My team started buzzing, patting my back, saying things like, "This is your baby, boss, and finally getting the recognition you deserve." I smiled and nodded and laughed along, but that birthday candle in my head, it was flickering in a Category 5 hurricane, because I'd watched Charles play this game before, and I'd seen enough golden boys get handed kingdoms they didn't build. The conference room had bagels. That's how I knew it was bad. Charles only sprung for catering when he needed to soften a blow or sweeten a betrayal. The last time there were pastries in the break room, half the QA department got restructured and their manager found out via calendar invite. So when I walked in and saw the glossy spread of carbs and coffee, I almost turned around. But I didn't, because I had front row seats to whatever performance was about to unfold. We filed in like jurors to a verdict we already knew. Department heads, project leads, and yes, interns, plural. Because apparently fresh blood was the new performance metric. I took my usual spot, left side, middle of the table, close enough to hear everything, far enough to avoid direct eye contact. Strategic invisibility, perfected over 4 years of practice. Charles entered last, like a game show host after the commercial break. This time, he had Brian with him. Brian in a blazer that still had the size sticker on the sleeve, carrying a legal pad like it might explode. Team, Charles began with that practiced sincerity he reserved for interns and performance reviews. As you know, we're entering an exciting growth phase. I already hated where this was going. He clicked his presentation remote. The first slide appeared. Project Elevate, Strategic Innovation Initiative. It was in Comic Sans. I blinked twice. Surely this was a joke. We've been analyzing market trends, studying the competition, he continued, completely ignoring the 6-month competitive analysis I'd compiled that was sitting signed and approved on his desk. And we've realized we need to approach this initiative with fresh eyes. Here it comes. That's why I'm thrilled to announce that Brian Cooper will be heading Project Elevate as our strategic innovation lead. Silence. The kind of silence that makes you question if sound still exists. A vacuum where common sense goes to die. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed, but it sounded like what the hell turned into a throat clear. Even the coffee maker in the corner seemed confused. Charles beamed. Brian stood up awkwardly. Thanks. Really honored. Looking forward to learning. Leading. I smiled, and I clapped. 3 slow, polite claps like a golf gallery applauding a decent putt. Everyone else followed suit, unsure whether to celebrate or check for hidden cameras. Charles never looked at me. Not once. My name wasn't mentioned. No acknowledgement that I'd built every system this project would rely on, that I'd written the vendor frameworks and designed the client interfaces. Nope. All that mattered now was Brian, the intern whose LinkedIn profile listed team player as a skill and had a quote from The Wolf of Wall Street in his bio. After the meeting, I didn't storm out, didn't punch a wall or kick a trash can. I just walked back to my desk, opened my laptop, and started typing a very important email. Not my resignation. Not yet. Something much more strategic. 2 hours later, Brian appeared at my cubicle, sweaty and holding a printed copy of our Apex manufacturing agreement. "Hey, James," he said, waving the paper. "Do you have the original file for this?" I don't really understand the liaison language. I looked at him for a long moment. Long enough for him to start fidgeting. Then I smiled like a man who'd just seen the light at the end of a very long tunnel. "That's not my project. Not my anymore," I said. And I meant it. Charles's office smelled like old leather and expensive mistakes. Mahogany desk, chair that cost more than my first car, framed photos of him shaking hands with politicians who'd probably forgotten his name. The decor screamed, I peaked in the 90s, and I'm not over it. I knocked once and walked in without waiting. He was on the phone, pretending to sound important, shuffling papers like they contained state secrets. Yeah, we'll circle back on the implementation timeline, he was saying. Brian's going to quarterback the vendor transitions. Fresh perspective, you know? Love it. Quarterback. Jesus. He hung up and looked at me with his version of fatherly warmth. James, big day, huh? Exciting times. Hope you're ready to support Brian as he ramps up. Support Brian. Like I was his unpaid life coach instead of the guy who'd actually built the thing Brian was about to drive into a wall. I wanted to thank you, I said, calm as a lake at dawn. He blinked. Oh? For the opportunity, for the experience, for showing me exactly where I stand. I laid a white envelope on his desk. Clean, crisp, no drama. His face went through several expressions before settling on confused irritation. He opened it and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I, James Parker, resign effective 2 weeks from today. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again like a fish discovering philosophy. You're joking. No, I said. Same professional tone I used to explain why we couldn't expense lunch at Hooters as client entertainment. He leaned back, suddenly smaller in that oversized throne. Is this because of the project? I tilted my head. You made your decision. I'm making mine. Come on, James. Let's be adults here. You're taking this personally. You made it personal the moment you decided I was more valuable, invisible. He stared at the letter like it might start talking and explain where he went wrong. I turned to leave, paused at the door. I'll transfer access to all the necessary files. Some might take time. Legal clearance and all. He squinted. Legal clearance? I smiled wider. Some of our vendor contracts are delicate. You'll want legal involved, especially on the liaison agreements. I left before he could ask what I meant, before he could see me pulling out my phone to send a blind copy email to legal@apexmanufacturing.com with the subject line, per clause 7.3, notice of authorized liaison departure. I packed slowly. No big announcement, no farewell email, just quiet, methodical closure. Every file archived, every handoff documented, every access code transferred to the appropriate directories. Except for a few I left intentionally blank, just to see who'd notice. By 3 p.m., word had leaked. By 5 p.m., people were whispering by the water cooler. By 6 p.m., Brian tried to log into the vendor management system and got slapped with a restricted access pop-up. That night, over takeout pizza, my wife said, "So you really quit?" I nodded. Yep. She chewed slowly. Dad's going to freak. He already did. Are you okay? I thought about it. I'd spent 4 years grinding myself into someone I didn't recognize, waiting for validation that was never coming. I'd been the good soldier, the team player, the guy who smiled and took it. Now I felt free. I think I am, I said. The next morning, I registered Parker Solutions LLC and sent myself one final email with the subject line, in case they come crawling. It took exactly 11 days for the wheels to start coming off. Not a dramatic explosion, just the slow, grinding sound of machinery realizing one of its essential components was missing. It started with a Slack message my old assistant forwarded me. Anyone have contact info for Apex Manufacturing? Brian's hitting a wall on the Q4 order. That wall was me. See, when I'd negotiated the Apex agreement, I'd insisted on single-point liaison language, not because I'm a control freak. Okay, maybe a little. But because their VP of operations hated dealing with multiple contacts. One voice, one relationship. That was the deal. And buried in clause 7.3, between the boilerplate indemnity language, it stated clearly, authorized liaison, J. Parker. Transfer requires 30-day notice and written approval from Apex Legal Department. Guess who didn't get that memo? The order got kicked back with a polite note. Per contract terms, we cannot process requests from unauthorized personnel. Week 2, another vendor, Steelworks Industrial, flagged a delivery timeline issue. Turns out their contract included penalty waivers that only applied while I was overseeing implementation. Without me, late fees kicked back in hard. $15,000 per day, retroactive to my departure date. The magic project with Comic Sans Dreams started bleeding money before it even launched. I didn't gloat, not out loud. But when my old desk neighbor texted me, "Did you take the whole engine with you or just the spark plugs?" I did allow myself one satisfied sip of my morning coffee. Then came the call I'd been expecting. Not to me directly. Charles wasn't quite that desperate yet, but someone recorded the vendor conference call and sent me the audio. Brian was leading the meeting, and a client rep asked about IP ownership for the logistics module. I think we own it," Brian said, confident as a weather forecast. "It's all in our systems." You could hear the pause. Then the client calmly replied, "So you're confirming the intellectual property is fully transferred to your company?" Brian laughed. "Well, I mean, it's all here, right?" Someone left the call. That was the moment everyone realized Brian wasn't just unqualified, he was dangerously overconfident about things he didn't understand. My phone buzzed later that day. Unknown number. Voicemail from one of the junior project managers, whispering like she was in a confessional. "James, it's chaos over here. Charles is blaming the vendors, Brian's blaming the systems. Everyone's blaming everyone. Thought you should know." I smiled. Not a big grin, just enough to feel it in my cheekbones. Then I opened a document labeled Consulting Retainer Agreement V2.0 and adjusted my hourly rate upward. Charles never called me directly. Not when I'd worked weekends to save the Morrison Industries contract. Not when I'd pulled an all-nighter to prevent a $1 million shipment delay. Not even when his daughter and I had celebrated our 4th wedding anniversary. So when his name appeared on my phone screen on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, I let it ring. Twice. 3 times. On the 4th attempt, I answered with the same tone I used for telemarketing calls. "Hi, Charles." "James." His voice was honey poured over broken glass. "How are you?" I let the silence do the talking. He cleared his throat. "Listen, I've been meaning to reach out. Just wanted to see how things are going." I looked around my new home office. Clean desk, good coffee, no Brian asking me how to send calendar invites. "I'm well," I said. "That's great. Really great. Listen, I won't beat around the bush. We've hit a few bumps with Project Elevate. Growing pains, you know. Made me think maybe we could bring you back temporarily, just to smooth things over." There it was, the white flag, folded neatly in a cashmere voice. "I'm consulting full-time now," I said. Of course, but we're talking short-term engagement, just to get through this rough patch." I opened my laptop and pulled up a rate sheet. Tripled my old salary, added a minimum 90-day commitment clause. "I could consider it," I said, "depending on terms." A pause. "What kind of package are you thinking?" "I'll send you a proposal. It'll be very clear." Another pause. Nervous laughter. "You've certainly found your voice." "I always had it, Charles. You just talked over it." He chuckled, but it sounded hollow, like he was standing in a room where all the doors had disappeared. The retainer agreement was a thing of beauty, professional, thorough, and absolutely unforgiving. I sent it the next morning with a polite note about my availability for strategic transition consulting. The read receipt pinged 3 minutes after I hit send. The wire transfer hit my account 2 hours later with a single-line email. "Agreement accepted. When can you start?" But here's what Charles never understood. Clients aren't loyal to logos. They're loyal to results. To the person who answers at 2 a.m. when their shipment goes sideways, who remembers their kids' names, who delivers what they promise when they promise it, that person wasn't Charles Wagner Manufacturing Solutions. That person was me. It started with Hartwell Industries. They'd sent a formal request to Charles asking for a meeting about continued partnership viability. Corporate speak for "we're thinking about leaving." The leaked meeting notes were poetry. Charles tried his usual charm offensive. "We know there have been some transition challenges, but we're confident our new leadership is more than capable." Hartwell's procurement director cut him off. "Your new leadership couldn't find a delivery schedule if you stapled it to their forehead." "Wrong audience for jokes, Charles. We're terminating our current contract unless James Parker is re-engaged immediately." "Well, that might be complicated," Charles started. "No complication. We've already signed directly with Parker Solutions. If Wagner Manufacturing wants to maintain this relationship, you'll coordinate through him." I played that recording 3 times while eating leftover Thai food in my kitchen. Vindication doesn't always come with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives as a cold, professional email that says we prefer to work with him directly. Charles tried spinning it to his board as strategic partnership delegation. But everyone could read the numbers. Hartwell represented 22% of annual revenue, and that revenue was now flowing through my company. They weren't the only ones. 2 other clients had quietly reached out through back channels. Casual conversations, hypothetical questions. One sent flowers to my new office with a card. In case you're still performing miracles. I was. 3 months later, I was keynote speaker at the Regional Manufacturing Excellence Conference. Charles was in the audience, 2 rows back, taking notes like a student in my advanced class. After my presentation, he approached the stage. Older, grayer, smaller somehow. "Nice talk," he said. "Thanks. I guess I underestimated you." I looked at him for a moment. 4 years of underestimation, wrapped up in one inadequate sentence. "No," I said. "You just never bothered to estimate me at all." I walked away. I had clients to call, projects to review, and a business to run. The business I'd always been capable of running if someone had just given me the chance, or if I'd been smart enough to give it to myself sooner.